Remember hearing "Why Have I Lost You" and that incredible falsetto floating above CAMEO? The man behind that voice, Wayne Cooper, passed away. Larry Blackman stepped away from touring, while the surviving members eventually turned on each other over the CAMEO name. Nearly 50 years later, this is what became of CAMEO, and some of them are almost unrecognizable today. First up, there was simply no mistaking Larry Blackman once CAMEO hit its stride. The razor-sharp hair, the red codpiece over his jeans, and that explosive "ow" made him look and sound like nobody else in funk. He could sing, play drums, and spend an entire show moving like he had unlimited energy. But the Larry Blackman fans remember from those CAMEO videos is becoming much harder to find in 2026. Blackman turns 70 this year, and these days he's based in Las Vegas, Nevada, where CAMEO's name has remained closely connected to the city's nostalgia circuit. The outrageous costumes are gone. His hair is gray, oversized sunglasses frequently cover his eyes, and instead of that famous red codpiece, you're far more likely to see him dressed in a suit. More importantly, Larry isn't touring the way he used to. According to CAMEO's official material, Blackman has been stepping back from touring and allowing a younger version of the band to carry more of the workload. His sons Larry Blackman Jr. and B.J. Wheeler Blackman have become part of keeping CAMEO alive on stage, while their father increasingly works behind the scenes on the creative side. For longtime fans, that's a pretty dramatic role reversal. Larry spent decades being the person CAMEO almost couldn't exist without. Now his sons can be the ones performing while the man behind "Word Up" watches from a much quieter position. And age hasn't been the only reason for slowing down. Blackman's health has become a concern in recent years. A scheduled appearance in Palm Springs was canceled under doctor's orders, and online reports have claimed that he suffered a stroke. These recent appearances have clearly shown a far less physically active Larry than the performer fans remember. There's another health scare much closer to home. His wife, Patricia Blackman, has also reportedly suffered a stroke. She was fortunate that warning signs, including facial drooping, were noticed quickly enough for her to receive medical attention. So the couple now is getting older together and watching each other's health. Patricia has become an important part of Larry's quieter life, away from the constant touring schedule. Meanwhile, CAMEO hasn't disappeared with him. This time, it's happening inside his own family. Larry Jr. and B.J. are helping carry the music onto stages their father can no longer dominate the way he once did. Larry, meanwhile, can remain involved without pretending he's still the man who could dance, drum, and scream "ow" through a 2-hour show. For anyone who remembers "Word Up" blasting out of speakers, it's quite a sight. The red codpiece is gone. The high top is gone. The non-stop dancing has slowed dramatically. But at 70, Larry Blackman is still behind CAMEO. Only now, his sons are increasingly the ones standing in front of it. Larry Blackman got to grow old with CAMEO. Wayne Cooper never had that chance. For us, Wayne was the slim young singer with the enormous afro mustache, open-chested disco shirts, and unique falsetto. He joined CAMEO in 1977, and when "Why Have I Lost You" arrived the following year, that soaring lead vocal became one of the sounds people remembered him for. By the early 1980s, Wayne had every reason to believe there was more ahead. He had spent years recording and touring with CAMEO, appearing during a successful run that included gold records and songs like "Shake Your Pants." But eventually, Wayne wanted something of his own. He left the group and attempted to build a solo career. It never really got off the ground. Without CAMEO around him, the solo project stalled, and then a much bigger problem took over his life. Wayne became seriously ill at a time when the AIDS crisis was only beginning to enter public consciousness. Treatment was extremely limited, fear surrounding the disease was enormous, and the stigma could be almost as brutal as the illness itself. Wayne's health deteriorated quickly. The thin frame fans remembered from the stage became increasingly frail, and whatever plans he had for establishing himself outside CAMEO were overtaken by his illness. In 1984, Wayne Cooper died in New York at 28 years old. He was still a young man, and the timing makes his story especially sad for CAMEO fans, because Wayne died just before the band entered the period that would make its name recognizable far beyond the funk audience that had followed them through the 1970s. 2 years later came Word Up. Suddenly, CAMEO was everywhere. The band Wayne had left was reaching an entirely new level of mainstream fame, with Word Up becoming the kind of song that would survive for decades. Wayne never got to see any of it. The singer who had helped shape CAMEO's earlier sound was already gone before its most famous era even began. Put on Why Have I Lost You today, and Wayne is still the young man people remember. The huge afro, the bright stage clothes, and that impossibly high voice. While CAMEO continued changing around him, Wayne Cooper's story stopped in the early 1980s. Wayne Cooper's story ended before CAMEO reached its biggest years. Tommy Jenkins was there when those years finally came. With his neatly shaped hair, thick mustache, open shirts, and smooth tenor, Tommy was the perfect counterweight to Larry Blackman's much sharper delivery. And when Word Up and Candy took off, he helped write the songs that turned CAMEO into something much bigger than the funk band they had started as. By 2026, Tommy is 70, and you probably wouldn't recognize him immediately from those old CAMEO performances. The carefully styled hair is completely gone. Tommy now keeps his head shaved, the thick mustache has disappeared. And these days, you're more likely to see him wearing glasses than anything resembling those flashy stage outfits. His face has naturally aged and filled out, giving him the look of a regular retired gentleman, rather than someone who once stood under the lights with one of funk's wildest bands. And that's actually pretty close to the life he lives now. Tommy has settled around Atlanta, Georgia, far away from the constant hotels, tour buses, and late nights that once came with CAMEO. He spends considerably more time at home these days, cooking, writing, and enjoying the kind of routine that probably would have seemed impossible during the band's busiest years. He's also sharing that quieter life with Carol. The two recently made their relationship official and jumped the broom, giving Tommy something else to celebrate as he entered his 70s. Instead of another giant tour or reunion dominating his life, marriage and family have become much more central to his everyday world. And unlike some of the other CAMEO members, Tommy's life is so happy and healthy in 2026. Tommy simply seems to have chosen a different life. And this is where things get a little unexpected. Because when Tommy stopped spending so much time with CAMEO, he didn't stop writing. He just stopped writing only songs. These days, Tommy Jenkins writes crime fiction. His novel Crime, Love, and Honor moved him into the world of murder, relationships, and mystery. A strange career turn for anyone who remembers him singing funk records in an open shirt and gold chains. Apparently, the creative part of Tommy never went anywhere. It just found another place to come out. Music still occasionally pulls him back, too. He has continued making independent material such as Like We Used To, but without rebuilding his entire life around touring. He can record something because he wants to, rather than because CAMEO needs another album followed by months on the road. So, in 2026, you won't usually find Tommy standing beside Larry under the CAMEO lights. You're more likely to find him at home near Atlanta with Carol, working on another piece of writing or quietly making music on his own terms. You know, he's perfectly happy with that, apparently. Remember the first time CAMEO slowed things down with Sparkle? Behind that soft 1979 ballad was Anthony Lockett, barely into his 20s, singing lead and bringing a romantic side to a band better known for hard funk. Back then, he was slim and youthful, with braids or a neatly shaped afro, shiny disco clothes, and a guitar never far away. Almost 48 years later, Anthony is still holding that guitar, but almost everything around him has changed. Today, Anthony is 64 years old. His hair is completely gone now, replaced by a shaved head and facial hair, while his face has filled out and carries the deep lines you'd expect after nearly 5 decades on the road. He's noticeably heavier than the young man on those old CAMEO records, too. And these days, he's one of the few people on stage who actually remembers what CAMEO was like before most of its biggest records even existed. With Larry Blackman stepping back from touring, Anthony has become one of the longest-serving CAMEO musicians still performing regularly. That has changed his job in a way he probably never expected. Now, he's playing alongside Larry's sons. Larry Blackman Jr. and B.J. Wheeler Blackman are increasingly helping carry their father's music forward, while Anthony has become one of the older hands around them. Nearly half a century ago, Anthony was the young guy joining Larry's band. Today, he's helping Larry's children perform the music their father built. His playing has naturally changed with age as well. Anthony isn't trying to attack every guitar part with the speed or physical energy he had in his 20s. His playing is more relaxed now, and after almost 48 years with these songs, it doesn't really need to be flashy. His life away from the stage is even quieter. Anthony has kept much of his family life private and is based in Georgia, where the man once surrounded by tour buses, disco clothes, and late-night shows now has children and grandchildren of his own. That matters more now because CAMEO itself doesn't look the way it used to. By the time CAMEO became famous for the stripped-down synth sound of Word Up, something that had once been impossible to miss was already fading from the picture. The horns. And two brothers had spent years right in the middle of that original wall of sound. Nathan Leftenant had the trumpet, Arnett Leftenant the saxophone, and together they helped give early CAMEO the huge, sweaty, horn-driven funk older fans remember from before the band reinvented itself. They had been around since 1974, when both were young men with enormous afros, tight, colorful outfits, and enough energy to dance while blasting through a live horn section. Known as the Tighty Brothers, Nathan and Arnett contributed to the horn arrangements and sound of CAMEO's first 7 albums. Back then, their lives meant recording sessions, overnight travel, and another stage waiting in another city. In 2026, Nathan Leftenant is 72 years old, and Arnett Leftenant is 74 years old, and somehow, they're playing together again. You wouldn't immediately recognize the two men from those old photographs. The giant afros have disappeared, their hair is shorter and gray, and glasses and neatly tailored clothes have replaced much of the flamboyant funk fashion. Their faces have aged considerably too. They look more like two distinguished older gentlemen than the brothers who once bounced around a CAMEO stage with horns pressed to their mouths. And unlike Larry Blackman, neither brother has built his later life around Las Vegas. They've also built quieter lives on the East Coast. Arnett has been associated with New York, while Nathan has lived in neighboring New Jersey, keeping the brothers close enough that music can still bring them together without either man having to live the non-stop touring life they knew in their 20s. Arnett, especially, went somewhere nobody watching CAMEO in the 1970s could have predicted. He went back into education and earned a doctorate in psychology. So by the time most musicians from his generation were thinking about retirement, the former CAMEO saxophonist had another identity entirely: Dr. Arnett Leftenant. Both brothers also built families away from the spotlight. Their marriages and children were never marketed as part of the CAMEO story, and by their 70s, family and grandchildren had become part of a much quieter existence. But their relationship with CAMEO became anything but quiet. For years, former members and Larry Blackman fought over something enormously important: who actually had the right to use the CAMEO name? And Nathan was right in the middle of it. Court records show that Nathan stopped performing with Larry Blackman's CAMEO around 2005. Years later, he began performing with former members under the name Original CAMEO Family. Then in 2016, Nathan and other former members released We in the House using the CAMEO name. That created a serious problem. Larry Blackman had continued operating CAMEO after Nathan left, and in 2017, Blackman registered the CAMEO trademark for live performances. Nathan, Arnett, Gerald Bright, Gregory Johnson, and later Tommy Jenkins became involved in federal litigation with him over trademark rights, royalties, and related claims. And this wasn't some quick disagreement between old bandmates. It dragged through federal court for years. Arnett's position was particularly difficult. He had left CAMEO much earlier, in 1981. According to the court, there was a roughly 35-year gap between his departure and his participation in the 2016 recording We in the House, with insufficient evidence that he had continuously used the CAMEO marks during that period. The result was brutal for his ownership argument. The court concluded that Arnett had not retained ownership rights in the CAMEO marks after leaving the band. Nathan's case was more complicated because he had remained with CAMEO much longer. The court recognized that Nathan appeared on at least 16 of CAMEO's 18 albums and had been involved with the group until 2005. But that history didn't automatically give him permanent control of the name. The evidence showed that CAMEO continued operating under Blackman after Nathan stopped performing with the group. In a 2022 reconsideration ruling, the court concluded there wasn't evidence showing Nathan retained rights to the CAMEO live performance mark after leaving in 2005. Once Blackman registered that mark in 2017, Nathan couldn't simply claim the same right because he'd spent decades helping build the band. Some infringement questions involving Nathan's later performances remained contested, making the litigation considerably messier than a simple winner and loser story. And there was another legal fight running alongside it. In 2021, Nathan, Arnett, Tommy Jenkins, and several other musicians filed a separate federal copyright case in New York involving Blackman, UMG, and related parties. So by this point, former CAMEO members weren't merely disagreeing backstage. Their differences over the band's music, rights, and business had reached federal courts in multiple states. Eventually, Nathan and Arnett found another solution: stop fighting to make their future depend entirely on the CAMEO name. In September 2023, Nathan and Arnett joined Tommy Jenkins and Gregory Johnson in filing a trademark application for a new name: the Word Up Story. The application specifically covers live musical performances and concerts. And interestingly, the filing remained active but suspended as of January 2026, showing that the business side of their post-CAMEO identity was still being worked through decades after these men first played together. That gives Nathan and Arnett a very different place in 2026. So these days, the two brothers aren't simply retired musicians sitting at home remembering CAMEO. They're in their 70s, their grandfathers. Arnett became Dr. Arnett Leftenant. And after years spent fighting Larry Blackman over the name they helped make famous, the brothers found another name and started performing their story themselves. Some musicians leave a famous band because everything falls apart. Gregory B. Johnson did something much simpler. He left. In CAMEO's early years, he was the cool-looking keyboard player buried behind synthesizers, with an afro, heavy beard, oversized sunglasses, and the kind of leather-heavy funk wardrobe. His keyboards ran through early records like Cardiac Arrest, We All Know Who We Are, and Secret Omen. Then, in October 1982, Gregory walked away from CAMEO. By 2026, Gregory is 75 years old, and unlike Larry Blackman, he didn't spend the next 4 decades making CAMEO his entire life. The huge afro and dark beard are long gone, and the flamboyant clothes have been replaced by a much simpler look. Put an old photograph beside him today, and you're looking at a man who has visibly lived another half-century. But Gregory's life after CAMEO is actually more interesting than simply saying he retired. He went back to school. After leaving the group to reassess what he wanted from his life, Gregory completed his formal music education at the Manhattan School of Music, eventually earning both bachelor's and master's degrees. He later moved into the professional audio world, working as a consultant and sales representative, and eventually writing about audio technology for B&H. That's a pretty unusual second act for someone who had already spent years making gold records. And Gregory never stopped being a working musician either. He continued performing gigs, teaching piano students, making keyboard demonstrations, and running his own record label. So when he left CAMEO, he wasn't walking away from the keyboard. He was walking away from the way CAMEO was being run. Gregory has been surprisingly open about that. When asked years later whether he regretted leaving before the band's biggest commercial period, his answer was essentially no. He believed the organization was spending beyond its means, watched members being cut or leaving, and wasn't happy with Larry Blackman's decision to move CAMEO away from the horn-heavy funk sound Gregory loved. And the timing couldn't have been more dramatic. Gregory's final CAMEO period included 1982's Alligator Woman, where he was still playing Fender Rhodes, Moog synthesizer, and singing backing vocals. Then he left. 4 years later, CAMEO released Word Up, and suddenly Larry Blackman and the remaining group had the enormous crossover hit Gregory never experienced with them. You might think watching that happen would have driven him crazy. Apparently it didn't. Gregory later said he didn't regret leaving, even admitting that Word Up wasn't particularly to his taste. For him, the CAMEO he loved was the larger, harder funk band, the one packed with musicians, keyboards, and horns. And Gregory had been there almost from the beginning. But here's the part that makes his story particularly interesting in 2026. Gregory has come back around to those old bandmates. In late 2025, he appeared alongside Tommy Jenkins and brothers Nathan and Arnett Leftenant as part of the Word Up story. The 4 former CAMEO members talked publicly about their old chemistry, their music, and plans to continue performing, with a show scheduled at City Winery Atlanta that November. So, at 75, Gregory isn't sitting somewhere telling people he used to be in CAMEO. He's playing again with men who were actually there with him. That makes his position today very different from the man who simply walked away in 1982. He left before Word Up made CAMEO internationally famous. He finished his education, worked in professional audio, taught piano, ran his own label, and kept playing without needing Larry Blackman's version of CAMEO to do it. Then, more than 4 decades later, Gregory found himself back beside Tommy, Nathan, and Arnett anyway. They're playing the old music under a new name, and Gregory B. Johnson is once again sitting behind the keyboards. You probably heard Aaron Mills years after you thought you'd stopped hearing him. That bass underneath Outkast's Ms. Jackson. Aaron played on the record. But more than 20 years earlier, those same hands had already been holding down CAMEO, where the tall, energetic young bassist could be seen bouncing across the stage, sometimes with his shirt hanging open and his bass almost permanently strapped to him. He was the guy making it almost impossible for everyone else to stand still. By 2026, Aaron is 73, and life has slowed down considerably. These days, he's based around Asheville, North Carolina, far removed from the endless cycle of hotels, sound checks, and overnight travel that swallowed so much of his younger life. The hair is shorter now, his face has aged and filled out, and the lean, restless bassist from those early CAMEO years has become a much calmer-looking older man. But getting older also forced Aaron to deal with something the audience couldn't see from the dance floor. His family had paid a price for all those years on the road. Touring meant long stretches away from home, and over time, Aaron had to confront the distance that had developed between him and his children. In his later years, rebuilding those relationships became far more important than chasing another tour. And that's where his story takes a surprisingly nice turn. One of those children didn't run away from his father's musical world. He picked up the bass instead. Aaron Ajay Mills Jr. followed his father into music, and by 2026, the younger Mills has helped carry the CAMEO bass tradition forward. So the same band that once kept Aaron away from his family eventually became something father and son could share. For Aaron, That has to be a very different feeling from the old days. He no longer has to be the man traveling constantly to keep CAMEO moving. He can spend more time at home in North Carolina while watching the next generation handle some of the work that once belonged to him. But Aaron's bass didn't stay trapped in the 1970s. More than 2 decades later, Outkast called him. He played bass on Ms. Jackson, the massive Stankonia single that reached #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Suddenly, a musician whose hands had helped move funk audiences in the CAMEO era was sitting underneath one of the biggest hip-hop records of a completely different generation. And he wasn't finished with Outkast. Aaron later played on Prototype from Speakerbox/The Love Below, once again carrying that old-school musicianship into music being made by artists young enough to have grown up listening to the generation he came from. By 2026, Aaron himself is no longer a regular fixture on CAMEO's touring stage. At 73, he doesn't need to spend every night recreating the physical energy of his 20s, and his life around Asheville gives him something that was much harder to hold on to when he was younger: time at home. That's what makes Aaron's transformation more interesting than simply putting an old photograph beside a new one. Aaron Mills carried CAMEO's bass through the funk years, Outkast brought those same hands into hip-hop, and now his own son is helping carry the instrument into another generation. And before we leave CAMEO behind, there's one more familiar face worth looking at: Gerald Bright. Back in the group's funk years, Gerald was hard to miss. Braided hair, a thick beard, leather clothes, and that gleaming trombone cutting through the band behind him. He wasn't just there to fill out the horn section either. His strong backing vocals became part of that crowded early CAMEO sound, and even when he briefly left with Aaron Mills to form MCB in 1983, his history with the group was far from over. Today, Gerald is 71, and his life looks nothing like those old photographs. By 2026, he's based in Atlanta, Georgia, where the wild CAMEO image has almost completely disappeared. His hair and beard have gone gray, the leather and braids are long gone, and he now tends to appear in glasses, jackets, and fedora-style hats. There's still something recognizable in his face, but he looks much more like a distinguished older artist than the young trombone player who once stood inside that enormous CAMEO lineup. And unlike some of the men we've covered, Gerald didn't leave music only to spend his later years looking backward. His wife is photographer and visual artist Sheila Bright, and their creative worlds have actually crossed. Gerald moved into a very different kind of music, meditative and healing sounds, including work connected with music of the gods. That material has accompanied Sheila's visual work in an artistic setting associated with Emory University. For an old CAMEO fan, that's probably one of the strangest transformations in this entire lineup. But Gerald's relationship with CAMEO didn't end peacefully. He became one of the former members caught up in the long legal battle with Larry Blackman over the CAMEO name. What had started decades earlier as musicians building records together eventually became a fight over who had the right to perform under the identity they had helped create. And ultimately, Larry came away with control of the trademark. That meant Gerald and the other former members couldn't simply put CAMEO on a poster and continue as before. Years of playing on the records didn't automatically translate into ownership of the name. But losing that fight didn't stop Gerald from playing the music. He remained connected with musicians from CAMEO's earlier period, including the Leftenant brothers and the wider circle behind the Word Up story. That gave these older musicians another way to perform material connected to the years they actually lived through without relying on Larry Blackman's CAMEO organization. And for Gerald, it also means his 70s haven't become one long retirement. One day, his musical world can be connected to Sheila's photography and the much calmer atmosphere of meditative music. Another can bring him back around musicians he first knew when CAMEO was still packed with horns. That's a pretty long distance from 1983, when Gerald and Aaron Mills were trying their luck outside CAMEO with MCB. But at 71, Gerald Bright is still making music, and fittingly for the last man on our list, that old CAMEO trombone hasn't completely disappeared with the years. And that's where CAMEO's story stands in 2026. The huge afros, wild outfits, and packed horn section belong to another time, but the men behind that sound took very different paths. Some are still performing, others found completely new lives, and a few never got the chance to grow old with the music they helped create. So, which CAMEO member surprised you the most then and now? And do you think the band would have been the same without that original lineup? Let us know in the comments, subscribe for more then and now stories, and thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.